Thanks, Greg. And with that, just to wrap us up with some ideas and options is Shelley Benson again.
I think I'd just like to talk a little bit about what Greg was saying. One of the things that we're working on is that storage capacity. So we need people to want to increase that capacity on the landscape. You can do that in a lot of different ways, individual projects. You can get together with your neighbors. You need to have conversations with your neighbors about what do you need to do for your watershed, what can you do for your area. So you can do it as an individual, you can do it as a group. Lake improvement districts are an option. You could reform a watershed district. A lot of work, a lot of effort, but there are a lot of individual projects and things you can do. You can work with the watershed. The county has worked with the water plan, and we'll be working with MPCA as we go through projects in that area. So our goal is to provide you information and options, and we'd like to have that conversation with you and work with you to create options for storage capacity in the Two Rivers area. So that's all I have for you, and I think we're at questions.
So we're going to take a minute to transition to the question and answer time, so I'd invite our presenters to come up and take a seat. If you want a 30-second stretch break, I invite you to stand as they are making their way up. If you have a written question, please just hand it up, and we will have an usher come around and grab it from you. Otherwise, we're going to have Roxanne come and maybe just pull this question up into the center aisle there, and we will ask for questions from the mic after we finish going over the written questions that were submitted. So you can be up first after we cover the ones that have already come in. And I believe we will start with Dan and or Crystal.
One of the questions that was asked, it says, do you want me to read the?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. St. Cloud State University Associate Professor of Hydrology measured the ford on property number such and such at 27 inches high. How high was it when you measured it? And I think I would refer back to the slide that Crystal had up where it showed what we call a longitudinal profile. Basically, it's a survey upstream and downstream of the low water ford. I think it was approximately 1,400 feet that we surveyed. And so we captured the high point of that ford. But as you can see, if you recall in that picture, there was some ups and downs. There was, some riffles, some pools, some runs. Depending where you take that measurement from, if you're in a pool, maybe that low water ford is 27 inches high. We captured that in the survey, and I think one of the key points is that the next adjacent high point downstream from that low water ford is approximately 9 inches or so lower than the top of that ford. So that's how I would answer that question, and whoever asked that, if you want to talk further about that, we'd be happy to do that in a side conversation. Second question, St. Cloud State University professor of hydrology calculated the ford would back up the lake relative to the river downstream of the ford by 8.4 inches. What amount of backup did you calculate due to the ford? Based on the hydraulic analysis that was completed at the lake, there was zero impact on water levels from that ford. And if you recall, even at the ford, I believe it was 0.2 of an inch, or roughly 2 inches. So essentially, let me be clear, that low water ford crossing, crossing in the field essentially there, is not having an impact on water levels on Two Rivers Lake. Number 3, according to Stearns County surveyors' data, beginning July of this year, the lake was backed up about 10 inches. From your investigation, what caused this backup? I would answer this. I can tell you what didn't cause that backup, that being the low water ford. I can't say what caused the backup. I'm not, familiar enough with what levels were exactly observed this year. But we'd be happy to speak more into that. But I can tell you what didn't cause that to occur, and that was the low water ford. Question number 4, on June 21st of this year. Again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that because I'm not sure what happened on June 21st. Following a 3-inch rain the prior day, one of our Lake Association officers and his wife both observed the river rapidly flowing backwards into the lake. Since Crane Creek culverts on 190th Street are level and have a surface area of 88 square feet, and the south 2 river culverts flowing through Holdingford at County Road 17 are also level and have a surface area of 225 square feet, how is this possible without an obstruction in ditch 28? Sounds like one of those word problems in high school that were challenging then. What I can tell you is that it is possible to get backflow from Crane Creek. If you remember that watershed, Crane Creek actually enters downstream of the runout of Two Rivers Lake. But on June 21st, if Two Rivers Lake was relatively low and we had more of an isolated thunderstorm where Crane Creek maybe had 5 inches of rain, but the upper watersheds, upstream of I-94, maybe didn't get any rain. We've all seen that. You call your neighbor and, yeah, I got an inch in my rain gauge, I've got none in mine. So if that occurred, water levels can back up that system, and it could push water from that Crane Creek towards Two Rivers Lake. We've seen that, I think Phil mentioned Little Rock Lake. That's an example of where that lake's connected to the Mississippi River. When watershed conditions are right, we've had extreme flooding on the Mississippi where Little Rock Lake didn't receive that rainfall. Water levels were backed up. We actually got backflow into Little Rock Lake. The same thing could happen.
Thank you, Dan. Kurt has a question.
The question I have is, according to state statute 103.075, an obstruction on private property must be removed at the owner's expense. Why are we being assessed during the discovery determination phase? And 075 does say that if the board, which is the county board, determines that a drainage system has been obstructed on private property, that private property has a duty to remove that obstruction at their cost. I think the question is, and I don't know what assessments, somebody else would have to answer the question, what if any assessments have been made against ditch 28 and what were those assessments to cover? So I really can't answer that. And then why is the discovery determination, in other words, this analysis of if it has been obstructed, taken over 28 months? And again, I haven't been involved, so I don't know the time length or the study of how long it took. So, but the question I can answer is that until there's been a determination that an obstruction is affecting the efficiency of the system, the board doesn't have the jurisdiction to order it removed. It can only be ordered removed if it's, quote, an obstruction, and based on what Dan and the analysis, and again, I'm not an engineer or a hydrologist, shows it's not acting as an obstruction, and so there'd be no authority for the board to order its removal if there hasn't been a determination that it's an obstruction.
Two more questions, and then you're up, and you got those are yours. Okay.
All right. I have a couple questions here, and I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer these. If I'm not, could someone step up and help me out? The first one, is there currently any way to have those landowners benefiting from the drainage that they have done pay for projects to store their water downstream? So I think what we're talking about here is drain tile. I'm not sure who asked the question, but are we talking about if if I'm a landowner and I've tiled my land to drain into the ditch system, is there a way for those people to store the water or their own water?
You've mentioned with the last speaker about having impoundments and or restoration of water,
Right.
wetlands. That water is coming from places that it didn't come before, at least as a rate that it didn't come before.
Right, right.
Those people are having benefits, but as I see it, they're not paying for the damage that they're doing downstream.
Right. And there's a couple of things there, and I think Greg may be able to help with that some, with when people tile, can they store on their own property, and Greg's agency may be able to help with that some. The other thing is, is there a way to make them pay for their benefit from that ditch system? Because they're putting water into it that they may not have put in there before. And I think what we would have to do with that is a redetermination of benefits. And when you look at a redetermination of benefits, it's kind of a long process. And Kurt, I know you've probably been through.
Maybe I can try and answer the question. If you're in the assessed area, right or wrong, but this is just how the statute's written, it's clearly Minnesota was favoring drainage when this statute was written. It's obvious, a 100-year-old statute, that was very favorable to drainage. And if you're in the assessed area of a drainage system, you have the right to maximum potential drainage. So from a purely county ditch law, if you're in the assessed area, you have the right to drain whatever potential you can drain. Now, separate from that, under civil law in Minnesota, you can drain, this is separate from county ditch law. Common law in Minnesota is you can drain your property as long as you don't unreasonably harm your neighbor. It's called the reasonable use test, and I've tried many of those cases. It's usually a battle of experts where the neighbor upstream put in a 12-inch tile and I've only got an 8-inch intake on my side of the fence. Is that unreasonable? And then it always gets to be a battle of experts, and then it also gets to be a weather situation, because did what they do cause it, or nobody can afford to design a system for a 70 or 100-year storm frequency. So if you're going to get that 100-year storm, there isn't a system designed in the state of Minnesota that could handle that 7-inch rain. You're going to, whether it's here or Fairmont or Olivia, any county system are not designed for that. But so there's county ditch law, you have the right to drain, but if somebody's drainage is unreasonably harm you, you have a potential claim against them. But all of you know that the only people that make money in lawsuits are the lawyers. So you have to make sure that you can prove that and prove your damages, otherwise you may spend a lot of money and not be able to, because it's a tough thing to prove with weather conditions and other factors.
Thank you. We have another question come in.
The question is how does county and or townships determine size of culverts and elevation of culverts and the contribution of culverts toward increased flow rates into lakes and rivers? And this is somewhat of a jurisdictional question, I guess, where, if it's an existing culvert or bridge, they'll look at the drainage area that's presently going into that culvert. Before anything would be changed in size, there's generally what's called a hydraulic analysis of that culvert to look at what is the capacity of the culvert to pass that given flow event without really washing out the road. That's really what the risk is looked at by road authorities, is first so they don't have the road wash out, and then be adequately able to convey that flow so that it doesn't adversely impact somebody likely upstream or downstream from the culvert. When there's a water course that's regulated by the DNR, That's why one of the reasons a permit is often required for replacement of culverts or the installation of new culverts. And we look at those culverts that they're properly designed so that they don't adversely impact other people's property. If it's not regulated by the DNR, I'd have to defer to the county engineer for, exactly how they determine size of culverts and pipes, but generally there are standards for, township roads passing roughly a 25-year frequency event. County and state highways oftentimes need to pass the 50 or the 100 years, so there's not a loss of life potential if a flood were to occur.
Greg wanted to add a little bit.
The screen isn't up anymore, but if you remember the big pipe with kind of the elbow on it, one of the first example slides that I had here, this question brings up a good point that there are all kinds of existing pipes or culverts out there through roads. This was through the trail, the Wobegon Trail. And all that was done in that case was keep the same size pipe, but put an elbow on it so it created some storage behind it of water. So there's all kinds of opportunities out there if the road authorities or whoever has a pipe going through the trail or the road would allow a little backup of water. You have the potential of creating storage in those watershed or upland areas that can help the flooding issues cumulatively.
Yeah, this would be a question for DNR to follow up to the earlier question. If we were to go and measure anything in the river right now, we would not be experiencing anything with regard to a backup into the lake. However, earlier this year we did see, and the elevation data from the county confirmed that something was backing up the lake in that ditch. I don't know when you took your data, meaning, if you took it right now, you wouldn't find anything that would back up in the ditch. But at times there are things in there that do back up the lake, and the data proves that it's there. The only thing we've identified that could cause it was that ford, if it was high enough. In your calculations, did you identify how high it needed to get to cause a backup? And or if we identify another time when this lake backs up again, relative to the outlet of the river, who do we call and how do we get somebody to find out what it is if it isn't the ford?
Try to remember all of that question, but I think the key part of it is that you're asking how high would that low water ford need to get where we might see an impact. And again, that's going to depend a little bit on the magnitude or amount of water that we're talking about. But when the water level stays within the channel banks, okay, you're talking roughly then about a 1.5 or almost a yearly, rainfall event. There's a lot of storage once it goes out over bank. Correct me if I'm wrong, Crystal, I believe the elevation difference between that low water ford and the run out of the lake is about 3 feet, or closer to 5. You'd have to have that low water ford being 5 feet in height or more to see an influence where it would create a backwater level effect on Two Rivers Lake.
You were right the first time on 3 feet, but it's 3 feet for 10,000 feet. You're not quite at 10,000.
So I think the next question is you were asking who should you talk to or contact when you feel there maybe is a new obstruction in the channel. Since I can only speak to the ditch, the county ditch, that you would want to talk to the ditch authority, Scott Marlin's office, anything pertaining to the county ditch there. That is not something that's regulated directly by the DNR.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I'd like to remind you, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint that you can sign a clipboard with your address, and if you'd like some other form, it will be available as a presentation to share and with your neighbors who are unable to make it tonight on the Stearns County website. If you search by informational meeting 2 Rivers Lake, you would be able to find that. And if you go on YouTube, you'd be able to find the video version of it. The resource people will be here for a couple minutes. If you have individual questions, why don't you join me in giving them a round of applause for the information meeting.
We'd be happy to take the
We'll stay a while. There's
gentleman's
probably some
question
more
there.
questions that people have as long as we're here.
I have a question. I believe it's directed at Kurt or maybe the board. I was assessed for removal of something, and I'm wondering why. What was that assessment for? I was told it was for a blockage, and why do just a select few people get assessed? Why doesn't every landowner, even though it's
I'll answer the
classified?
second question. In 1906, right or wrong, they determined who benefited from the construction of Ditch 28. And so the only people that can be assessed are those that were assessed in 1906 without a redetermination of benefits. If there was a redetermination of benefits, there would be more property brought in, which is true of every ditch system that's this old, because at that time they didn't have the technology we have now.
So why can't we do that?
We could, but the landowners pay the cost of the redetermination of benefits, where you appoint 3 viewers, and you have to acquire a 1-rod grass strip on each side of the ditch, if you do, which is 16.5 feet, if you do a redetermination of benefits. A redetermination of benefits does not help the ditch system. So if you're having a $4,000 a year assessment, it certainly isn't fair, I agree with that. But you would not do a redetermination of benefits for $4,000, because a redetermination of benefits, when you add in the 1-rod grass strip, could cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000.
Well, then I want to know who authorized the removal of that stuff? Because
And again, the county,
nobody asked me.
that's public record, and Scott can probably answer it, but every dime that's assessed, there's something in the, Denny or Scott, they would be able, if you ask them, they'd be able to say, we assessed 2,000.
They said blockage.
Okay, well, they'd be able to tell you exactly.
Right.
Right.
And I think I can help with that question. In 2011, we were informed that there were a number of trees that were in the ditch, and we went out and inspected the area, and there were a number of trees that were in the ditch. We suspect could have been from windfall, from storm damage. There was quite a bit of storm damage during the previous year. So what happens when we find those blockages, or we're, you as, if you're part of the benefited acreage of that ditch system, and you let us know, we go and inspect it. If we do determine that there is a blockage or something holding up water, then we can go and take a look at that, and that's what was removed. So that's what you were assessed for.
Yeah, I get that, but I also don't get that, 1906, the slide showed there was only a select few people. Now there's 159 people that are benefiting from this, and a select few are paying for it.
Right.
And that's exactly right. That's true all over the state on these old ditch
It's just
systems.
unfair.
And that's why we're doing these I'm doing dozens of redetermination of benefits. But those are on systems where, and again, the landowners have the right to come to the county board and ask that there be a redetermination of benefits. And if the board determines that either the assessed area has changed or the land values do not reflect current day land values, they can order a redetermination of benefits.